Yiching for the insights right before this talk around the aspect of forensics by design and explaining why forensics shouldn't be an afterthought. And I think it's a great segue to this talk actually, because there's an aspect of CTI I would like to cover in this particular talk, and then CTI is a great opportunity to enrich this idea of forensic by design. So targeted cyber defense, it's pretty much a approach to cybersecurity that emphasizes the use of intelligence and knowledge of specific threat and threat actors to enhance our defensive mechanisms or measures. It involves leveraging insights we gain from analyzing threat actor TTPs, vulnerability information out there, and then learning from the adversaries out there to inform and strengthen our organization's security strategy. So we can use this concept in both proactive defense, which is like detection engineering, as well as the enrichment during the active incident response engagements or exercises. So building affordable defense is about how to prioritize your budgets and then how to get the best outcome for your bucks in hand, right? So if you follow that 80-20 rule, so doing 20% and then focus on that key 20% will actually help you to achieve 80% of the targeted outcome. So let's get into the conversation area. So at the moment, based on my research, we have a problem in organization because we don't have an unlimited budget to protect under the every possible threat under the sun, right? And then sometimes organizations does not necessarily know where to start or where are we, right? So this particular thought can be benefited to large organizations, as well as more importantly, smaller to medium size organizations who actually in the supply chain of those large organizations, right? So this will enhance your cyber threat portfolios. In today's agenda, we're going to talk about how do you prioritize the spend and increase the visibility, and then how do you understand in the telemetries used by the actors, and then how do you use that to enrich detection engineering as well as enrich response opportunities, and then potentially see if we can predict cyber criminals that may be likely to be targeted you without any crystal balls, right? So let's get science to work on this. So assumptions here is that you need to do a threat model in your organization to understand where you are at a ground zero level. So threat model is different from one organization to another. So in simple English, we say your threat model is not my threat model, right? So we need to understand that concept. So let's start with assets, right? So it's important to really understand that your critical systems are, where your critical systems are. Are they in cloud? Are they in on-premise systems? Or are they, maybe a SaaS service you're using, right? So you potentially need to know where your crown jewels are. These are the systems that matters. So know your assets, where they are located, right? So visibility is more important. And then also understand who are the threat actors targeting this particular industry, and then what's my vulnerability exposure look like, right? So what are the endpoints out there in the internet which are accessible, the systems which can be accessible from the internet. And whole threat model concept is once you identify that, and then you put down a threat and risk assessment which consider some of these things, who your vulnerable staff are, do you have potentially exposed systems over the internet. Sometimes it's a bit rare these days, but then it's actually happening at the moment. So someone maybe still forget to close down their S3 buckets properly, right? So in the Australian climate, we had a recent incident around that, right? And then what are the potentially likely phishable staff portal you may have, right? So we need to understand that and then bring that concept into the threat modeling. So that's where we start. What technology we use, what are the technology used by our partners, and then what are the technologies used by our suppliers. So there's a lot of what and who and why all these concepts, right? So try to put some science and structured analysis techniques around this problem. So think about these questions as you begin this journey, right? So a starburst is just one model. It's a SAT technique. You can put down different number of other SAT tooling, like questions tree, things like that, right? So I'll start with this. So here, the who aspect. Who are the threat actors targeting this particular industry which you are in, and who are they, right? And then who are the targets? Who are the victims? And then what were they after in these breaches, right? So were they after just deploy ransomware and get quick money out of it, or are they, really state nexus sort of actors, who really concern around having persistent in your network and then eavesdrop into your comms, right? And what did they do in this particular breaches? And then importantly, where did this happen? Is it globally, as in like, in the climate of Japan, are we thinking of, oh, this happened in the US, or this happened in Oceania region, this is happening in Australia, or this is regionally it's happened, or it's like locally it's happened, right? So it's important to understand that as well. And when did it happen? It happened last month, earlier in the year, or later in the year, or is it happening in the second quarter of the year? Right? It's good to understand those things. I'll explain them later, and in the production, how you can actually use that particular information in the prediction, right? And then why were they there? So is it because of pure IP theft, or were they after PII? Were they after PHI, personal health information, or they after your R&D, that organization's R&D data, right? So it's important to understand why they did it, right? So because this explains that threat actor motive in a grand scheme of things. And then again, most importantly, once you understand these 5 Ws, then understand how it happened, right? So break down that particular incidents around what was the initial access, then how they move laterally, and then meet their objective. So this is the visualization of recently published CISA's routinely exploited vulnerability. So the idea here is that vulnerability aspect is just one aspect into the organization's input. CTI pretty much facilitate the improvement of defensive strategies by enabling us to stay one step ahead of the adversaries, right? So if you know that, for example, our organizations has like Apache web servers, look at it here. Out of 42 top vulnerabilities, 5 of them are Apache, right? So we can target those systems saying, okay, so based on our patch cycles, so we need to prioritize these systems, right? So understanding the technology you have is important for us to proactively fix these issues we identify in those technology, right? So pretty much identify and prioritize potential risks based on their relevance and severity. So, it's clearly helping you to reduce your attacks posture from the outside. And by understanding attacker technique from previous slides around how it happened, we can fortify that defenses, right? So if the particular threat actor targeting Apache, say, web servers, and then you have Apache servers out there, then you might be a likely target. So understand how they're getting those access, and then try to block those things, right? So you're not trying to protect every single threat under the sun, but then you're building up a targeted model of defense which enable you to protect, right? So prevention is better than cure. Once you go deeper into this, so we have painting a larger picture from what do we know. So who are the threat actor operating this industry? Now, from our starburst, we identified that. Now put them into the picture. What actors pose the greatest threat to this industry, right? So it could be state actors, or it could be ransomware, or the financially motivated actors. Identify that. And then, are there common TTPs that are used by these actors, right? So for example, let's say there are 10 breaches happening in the last quarter, and then 8 of them used macro-enable Word documents as the initial access vector, right? So then that is the most common TTPs out of those actors around the around gaining initial access to the organizations, right? So try to prioritize that and then, deploy countermeasures against detecting or preventing the threat around Word enable or office documents in an email, right? And then what are the common vulnerabilities exploited this in industry? For example, let's say if the industry is healthcare, and who are the threat actors associated in that industry. So for example, if you look at the CTI at a global level for healthcare, so CLOP, Black Cat, 8base, so they're predominant in the particular area. So if you research into these three or so threat actors, you can identify what are the vulnerabilities they're after. So then if you use those technologies, try to prioritize them based on their relevancy and severity, right? In that way, you're not necessarily stopping the actor, but then you're making them to work harder in order to get into your organizations, right? So you put in that proactive defense and then fortify your defense around it, right? And then, if that particular technology being someone trying to scan it or someone trying to exploit it, so that's where this, previously discussed idea of forensic by design comes in, right? So you create detection ruling around that particular attack vectors or the attack attempts, and then you light up your SIM tooling or you light up your alerting systems to identify, oh, well, at this moment, someone from this particular location targeting my organizations, right? So it'll create that internal security awareness within the teams that because of the relevancy of these alerts, right? And then, once you understand these industries, let's dig it bit more deeper around the industries, right? So within the industries, subsectors. Let's say, again, we go with the theme around the healthcare. So it could be, in the healthcare climate, it could be aged care, or it could be, pharmaceutical. It could be just purely research organizations, right? Within that industry, you have sub-industries. Try to understand, what are the sub-industries operate within this industry, and then who are the actors after each of these industries, right? So this is about identifying the trend from what we know. So pretty much trying to determine the relevancy of the information we have collected from the overall scope, and then we trying to narrow it down in a funnel, and then sub-region within the large region, right? So if I'm from Australia, and if you're looking at the Australian climate, would it a Oceania sort of a region within the globe, or is it a South Australia based organization the actor is targeting, or this is the ACT based actors, right? So try to put the relevancy in your target geography, right? So is it based on the locations they're after, or is it based on a particular region they're after? And then, as I said this earlier, so the technologies used in the organization, are they targeted all of Apache products, or are they just target a particular version of Tomcat, right? And then do you have that Tomcat? And then this is the hard part, which is the technology in your third parties, right? So at the moment, one of the topmost breached software in the current climate, apart from the Microsoft stuff, CLOP has been exploiting MOVEit at a large scale. So the stats today is more than 1,000 odd compromises, right? So how much of your how much of reliance of this third-party software you use in organizations, right? So if you're using that particular software, and then even through your supply chain, your suppliers using that software, then again it's a risk to you, right? So then it's extremely important to understand the risks of these third-party poses to you, right? So try to tackle it. It might be a bit of a challenge, but try to tackle it. When you know all this information, and if you had a breach, so these proactively performed threat intelligence definitely going to fast track your response to the particular incidents, because you can pretty much come up with a traveling salesman sort of a problem to identify what may be the path of least resistance the attacker might get into the organization, right? So it's important to understand that aspect as well. And let's do some analysis, right? So FIN4 is a financially motivated threat group, right? So they targeted confidential information related to public financials market, particularly regarding healthcare and pharmaceutical company. Or there's a theme around healthcare. Keep talking about healthcare. So in this group, if you put down the into the graph based on that publicly available, this all research publicly out there, and publicly available TTPs, they're really focusing on getting initial access as well as the execution and then collection, given they focus on the data exfiltration as well as potentially deploying ransomware, right? So the collection is important to them. So they need to get as much as data out as much as early as possible. And then, they need to make sure they're in, right? So the initial access, exploitation, execution, and the collection, that's where the most TTP comes in. But if you try to compare them with this group, so APT28, so APT28, commonly known as Fancy Bear, according to CrowdStrike lexicon. So it's a Russian cyber espionage group, right? So what in this particular research, you can see that they're really worrying about the defense evasion, because their goal is to not just come and do a one-time collection and move on. Their objective is to embed themselves deeper and deeper and deeper within the organization, and then bypass their current controls to have that and establish that persistent into the network, so then they can eavesdrop and understand why you're doing certain things, and then they can even potentially looking to predict what you're doing in the organizations, right? So their objective is different. So it's important to understand the motive of threat actors when you're doing incident response, or even trying to build detection engineering. Why and what the threat actor is here, what they're trying to do. Once you understand this motive, so I'm talking about a couple of levels about the technical analysis. It's more to understand why they're here, and then that potentially can give you pivot point to look for and analyze artifact. Based on one artifact, you can potentially pivot into another by understanding their motives, because they're there for a reason, right? I don't think, except for the script kiddies or sort of a hacktivist, no one is trying hacking for fun these days, right? So when it comes to organized crime, right? So again, another group I would like to show, which is the, apologize for the inconvenience, everyone. And then back to the slide, APT29, which is also a similar threat group, Russian cyber espionage group, and commonly known as Cozy Bear. So if you look at them, they're also very targeted and care about defense evasion. So if you get APT28 and 29 groups, they really care around that defense evasion. But if you look at that financially motivated FIN4 group, they're not necessarily, they still care, but then they're not necessarily really prioritize the defense evasion. They're prioritizing it's different, right? So this is where we can understand and then leverage that information in your proactive defense as well as incident response, where to look, right? So it's important to understand these actors, so then you can actually fast track your response as well as your proactive defense. All right. And then, so let's compare the APT 28 and APT 29 groups. So colors in blue. So this is I'm not going to drill deep into this. So this is MITRE ATT&CK Enterprise Framework, and organizations or defenders, even attackers, use this framework to build their attacks as well as defense around it, right? So if the attackers are methodologically driven, right? So definitely defenders use this framework to form their defenses. So blue is based on the identified blue pretty much is based on the identified TTPs. What are the common TTPs for these two groups? So in a grand scheme of things, there are like lot of blue, which is a TTP overlap, right? So what I'm saying is, if you manage to build detection around these two, with these blue, and then you manage to address two groups overall, right? And then if you have say 10 different groups, and if you do an exercise to map these attack TTPs, then with that 20% effort, you're trying to block as much as, or you're trying to create detection ruling around these particular attack vectors for detection, as well as you're trying to uplift your defenses by putting down preventative controls, right? So this is where the return on investment come in, because you're not necessarily trying to fix everything. You're trying to get a maximum return out of your effort, right? So based on the say 10 threat actors you analyzed, you're trying to get into the most common TTPs and try to get more visibility, coverage, and prevention around that aspect to mitigate the threat from them, right? And then if you look at green, so green TTPs are APT 28 specific, and yellow are APT 29 specific. So this sample need to be enriched with more and more group. And I think that's a takeaway you can take from this exercise when you go to your work on Monday. Try to use the MITRE Navigator, and then explore what are the data out there around the threat actors in your organizations, and then try to build this, right? So this definitely, it's not again a one-time job, just like security, it's a journey, right? So you can't just do this one day and then tell, oh yeah, all the attacks have been done and then the threat actors are being tracked. No, so you have to do it on a daily basis in order to get that CTI enrichment into your proactive defense as well as response, right? So this is going to be a live document in your Confluence or in your incident response playbooks or in the detection engineering playbooks, right? And this is a historical diagram from Microsoft, right? So saw it a few years ago. I still love it, right? So if you look at this diagram, right? So the technology being used, RDP, the initial access by Maze and Robinhood ransomware is RDP. What is RDP? Ransomware Deployment Protocol, right? So don't have RDP enabled out there anyway, but if you do, so you might need to worry about these things, right? So the idea here is that they did a great job of mapping these at the moment, at that time, commonly known ransomware groups into their access pattern, and then see whether could we take a similar approach to block these or create detection ruling around it, right? So if so here, like Cobalt Strike as a lateral movement. So if you detected Cobalt Strike in the network, you kind of detecting a few of these ransomware operators. Right. So it's important to have that analytical mindset to put down the detection ruling as well as the prevention control uplifts. So this is a little research I did just the day before I submit my slides to SANS. So this is somewhere in late August. So if you look at this is pretty much the ransomware landscape in 2023 in Japan. So you can see, give me a second, I just maximize my screen. So you can see Logbit has a fair share, so 27% approximately, responsible for Japanese ransomware landscape, and then Black Cat, sorry, 18% market domination, Clop 12%. And then all these other folks are having a little share from the pie, right? But if you look at it, Logbit, Black Cat, and Clop having a larger share of the pie. So what does this mean? So if you drill down in an organization, Logbit, Black Cat, and Clop ransomware TTPs, there is a fair chance that you might manage to evade them, right? So you don't necessarily need to be need to fortify your organizations to the best defense, but you just need to outrun the bull, right? So that's mean you just need to run faster than the person person before you. That's pretty much it. So then you stay one step ahead of the remaining counterparts, your industry, right? And then so the second diagram include a industry breakdown of the ransomware landscape within the particular cycle in Japan. So you have industrial industrials, and then internet and software companies, and then household. So from these three, I'll just take one as an example. So if you get the intel for internet software industry, so Black Cat predominantly maintaining the market share 40%, and then Clop, Malox, and Black Basta have equal share, right? So if you put down up that might attack navigator for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so these four groups, then and if you're in this internet software industry, you get a fair chance of visibility around the threat you may face, as well as the attack TTPs these group might be doing to your particular organization. So create detection ruling around it, as well as try to build that prevention controls around those identified TTPs, right? Or, when you do that navigator exercise, look how much, what's the overlap aspect of it, right? So you might be surprised to see how much TTPs has been overlapped by these groups, right? So again, that's where the return comes in from these exercises, right? So you can do rapid ruling as well as rapid deployment around them to get that better return on investment, right? So you prioritize based on the relevancy and the severity, right? And so this is, you can see the source where I got it from. Like, this is bit dated data. They're not necessarily a real-time data. So this is for the high-tech industry. So the more red the controls, more red the TTP area, that's mean they've been very commonly used by the threat actors, right? So lighter the red, so lesser the threat actors, right? So in here, the return is you block or create detection ruling around these TTPs. So then you stay ahead one step or a couple of steps ahead of the actor by attacking the common TTPs and then have visibility around it. And then predict the future. This is interesting because we're not going to use any crystal ball here. So, it's good to understand, do you have any upcoming government regulation around particular industries in your geography in the country, right? So, that might be an interest for actors. And then threat actor trending. So actor trending is, what actors are after certain vulnerabilities and then which regions they're after, right? So you pretty much, to do this, you need to, you reinforce the knowledge we have gathered from the previous exercise and use your own judgment to determine pretty much the, future state of the particular industry, as well as the region you operate in, right? So the questions you might need to answer is that the regulations aspect, as the frequency of attacks for, certain type of threat actors are trending in this trending to a certain direction, right? And then is targeting of this region increase or decrease throughout the year, throughout the quarter, throughout the month, and then see which month the organizations, industries, as well as the geography being targeted. Is this go through it that December period, do you have any quietness, or in around like April, May period, you have like an increase of attacks, right? So then it might be a trend. So this analysis is really a data driven exercises, right? And then with certain subsectors within the industry being targeted more at the beginning of the periods or the end of the period, right? So I understand this data point. Once you bring them all together, you can potentially forecast or predict the future. So this presentation is pretty much a amalgamation of bringing CTI into the picture of blue teaming or the DFIR world. So then it can help blue teamers, defenders to proactively build your detection engineering and then use the similar thought process in your active response. So I think intelligence is not just a separate team or a function which operate in silos. So it's a collectively participating throughout your any engagements or in your as a standard operating procedure in your daily life, right? So incident response, detection, engineering, digital forensic, this whole thing is a team sport. So we need to collectively play to our strengths and stay ahead of the baddies. And thank you for listening, and I welcome any questions if you have in the Slack channel.
Awesome. Thank you, chat. That's great. Yeah, I mean, cyber intel is a game changer, right? Understanding who you're dealing with, having information about their tactics, their methods, their tools, having specific IOCs, having things that you can sort of build and develop is really great. And also it's interesting too, because it's not just important when you're investigating, but a lot of particularly cybercrime matters involve engaging with the attacker and knowing how they behave in their engagement, whether they release certain information or not, how they, regardless of whether a client is actually looking to pay someone or not, that kind of stuff is so valuable. And I guess too that these groups change, right? I mean, we see people like groups like DarkSide who, were so active and so aggressive, and then they shut down, and now we're seeing them sort of resurrected with Black Cat RV. So, they can change, they can rebrand, they can change their stripes, as it were, but their techniques and their approaches and their tooling kind of lives on, right?
Yeah, correct. Because that's the whole aspect of understanding and the why and the how, right? So end of the day, they're human operated, right? So you're not necessarily focus on the technology, you try to focus on that human and then try to build a pattern around it, right? So that's pretty much what you need to do around all life cycle of incident response, right? So you build the intel to enrich every single step around that how, why, right? And then everything else comes clear